Hey everybody, and welcome to the first interview of season 5. My guest today is Noah Rasheta. This was a fantastic interview for me because Noah, in a sense, is a role model. He's really a hero. He has this podcast called Secular Buddhism. He's really steady. He's really gentle, and he's provided for, I think, 7 years, all of these really practical short episodes on how people can improve their experience of life from this lens of secular Buddhism. So I really admire that. And I mean, he's grown quite an audience through being just incredibly real and authentic and passionate. So clearly that's something that someone in my position admires. But also, I love the fact, and this comes out in the interview, that he used to be a missionary, I think a Mormon missionary. And his perspective now, as a guy who's expounding on secular Buddhism, clearly like a very different ideological and philosophical framework than being a Mormon missionary, he's just so gentle with his former self and so loving and so kind, so compassionate. And there's just so much for me, and I think for all of us, to learn about how we relate to others and how we relate to our current and former selves through that. So there's a lot more in the episode. I'm really excited to bring it to you. Welcome to season 5. Welcome to 2023, and enjoy. Before we begin this episode, I want to put in a quick word from our sponsor, me. We got the name for this podcast from the mission of momentumlab, our coaching program. We are both incubating the next generation of heroes and the next step in the evolution of consciousness. If you listen to the show, you're already a part of that process. Thank you. So if you haven't already, sign up for the newsletter to get insights, tools, and inspiration on living a purposeful, visionary, and impactful life. And if it ever dawns on you that that's easier to do with a community of excellence urging you on, that it can make the difference in you achieving your personal goals, check out Momentum Lab. Okay, back to the show. I'm really stoked to have this conversation with you. You know, Dan talked about you a little bit in our talk, and then I listened, I've read some of your work, and I listened to a bunch of episodes this morning as I was doing my daily bread ritual. And the one, I think the first one I listened to was it like be who you are, just like be who you are. It's a recent episode. I mean, there were just so many things in that spoke to me. And I've been doing this kind of personal growth, personal development, trying to combine mathematics and rationality and spirituality for a long time. But a lot of what the voice in my head has been like, you have this potential. You need to live up to it. You have to keep doing things. It was exactly what you were saying. It was not like a helpful or effective voice in your head. And I was like, God, it's so true. And I was doing it while I was making bread, and I make bread every morning. It's a thing I started 8 years ago when I got married, and my wife is French, and she's really into, like bread people, good quality bread. And since we live in the US, that's just not available to her liking. So I learned how to make bread, and it's this daily practice that I got really good at without having any ambition about or wanting to be good at or anything. And it's the exact opposite of my meditation practice, where I've been like trying so hard for so many years, and I still feel like a total failure and doesn't bring me a lot of joy. And the bread thing is just like an infinite fountain of joy with no expectations. And it was like a real lesson, like a concrete lesson of what you were saying as I was listening to you. It's like, damn.
Yeah, that's the big difference, isn't it? Between the feeling that I should or I have to do this versus I get to, or I'm doing it just because I enjoy it, but there's no compelling reason to, like, there's no belief behind it that's influencing the decision making that says you have to do this. And then it becomes a more playful thing, and you do it because you can, because why not, rather than because I feel like I should, or I think there's a big difference there.
Yeah. And did you learn that through your study of Buddhism, or did you have some kind of visceral experience of that and then go and learn the theory afterwards?
I would say it was a little bit of both. It was through learning various concepts and ideas in Buddhism, and particularly the teachings around non-attachment or holding loosely to views. I recognize that holding too tightly, even to the view of, these teachings are beneficial, or I should be meditating, things like that. You're stuck in that same cycle of holding a little bit too tightly to it. It was like, well, why do I want to meditate? And when that transition to not because I feel like I should, but because why not? If I enjoy going out for a walk, then I go out and I enjoy the walk, but not because I feel I have to be out there walking. Same thing happened with the practices, particularly meditation. And it became a much more enjoyable experience because there's no pressure that I have to do it anymore. There's no end result, no benefit that I'm trying to extract out of it. It's the process itself is the enjoyable part.
It's interesting specifically with meditation because in our mainstream culture in the last 20 years, it's become much more of a thing. People are like, oh, you should be meditating and it has all these health benefits, cognitive benefits and this and that. I mean, do you think it ends up being counterproductive?
I think it does in a lot of ways because it ends up being one more of those things that causes you unnecessary stress or anxiety because you add it to the pile of things that I feel I should be doing and I feel bad that I'm not doing them. Either I'm not doing them or I feel like I'm not doing them well. And that's really not the point. I think sometimes meditation is presented like a tool, right? That's like, hey, if you want more peace, then you need this. Or if you want to be more successful in your productivity, then you need to start doing this. And while those are benefits that result from the practice, that those are not the goal of the practice. I think the goal of the practice is to break from the habitual reactivity and the autopilot mode that we kind of go into, and doing something deliberate without the need for it to be anything. It's like, I'm just doing this just to do it. And that's when you start to reap those benefits. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because if you're doing it just for the sake of the benefits, then you may not get those benefits. But if you're doing it without the expectation, then you may enjoy benefits. Kind of like your bread making. If you have the stress that you have to make this bread because you're selling them, or there's a high expectation for the quality, it may turn out the way you want. But anytime it's not turning out the way you want, now you're not enjoying the process. But because you do it in a way where it's just something that you do and you don't have to do it, the benefit of it turning out great is that's the icing on the cake. But it didn't matter because it was the process of making it that was what mattered,
Yeah. And it's this incredible, to like draw the metaphor a little further. It's this incredible thing that the bread I make it's subjectively awesome now, and people love it. And I make 4 loaves a day. And I give away 3, and people, they'll trade for it. They want to buy it. It's not really for sale, but people just love it. And every time I make a mistake, it's not a normal one. I just don't care. I'm just like, oh, this is an experiment that happened because the sourdough got too hot. And it's just always good. People are always appreciative. And I haven't had that experience in anything that I've like really tried for mastery at, because of this other narrative that like, I'm not good enough doing this thing. And the bread it's just like you're saying, it's just full, it's just play. Part of my project, this podcast, 10,000 Heroes, it's like mixed between a hypothesis and just like a blind belief that every one of us has a certain song we can sing or gift we can give. And if we get attuned with what that is, that's actually the way, like by being ourselves in the most radical way, that's actually the way we can make the most contribution. And it seems like it flows pretty well with this concept you're presenting of just be what you are.
Yeah, I think it really does. And I think from such a young age, we kind of adopt the societal norms and views that mold us into, whether it's intentional or not, it's just what happens. It kind of molds us into this duality of who I am, who I think I should be. Those are 2. And then there's who I think you think I should be, right? You meaning society or parents. And we're always juggling these things. And I don't think we spend a whole lot of time just trying to get comfortable in our own skin because we're always caught in the narratives that we have of who we think we should be or who we think others think we should be. And sometimes that's where we spend most of our lives, is fulfilling that role, trying to make sure that narrative is satisfied. But when we do get the chance to go back to the very first one, right? Just who am I, and just have full permission to just be me and to get comfortable in my own skin. I think there's a real sense of peace and contentment that arises from being able to do that.
Yeah, it brings up for me. Recently, I did this healing retreat in Brazil, and it was very challenging. It was kind of like a meditation retreat, but I became aware of a lot of like self-judgment and self-violence that I didn't know I had. And I was like, dude, I'm supposed to be like the Bob Marley guy. How do I have all this self-criticism? And then it's like, wow, I need much more healing than I thought I did. And I've never even had like really bad negative experiences. I'm very privileged, blessed, fun, easy life. And so it's like, okay, if I need all this healing, it's probably like a lot of people need a lot of healing. Do you have a sense of this be what you are, be who you are perspective? Is that just our culture, or is that just how the humans end up raising their kids?
That's a good question. I feel like that is a universal thing. I think in all cultures, you kind of encounter this. We can't help it, right? You're raised in a culture where you adopt conditioning, is what the Buddhist expression would be, the conditioning of your culture. An example of this would be words, right? Here we are communicating in English. So all of the experiences that we have of feelings and emotions and moods, we define them based on the words that we have. Thanks to the word, I can say I'm feeling happy. And we both kind of know what that means if I say happy, or if I say sad, or if I say whatever the word is. But we're kind of boxed in by the meaning that we have of those words. So that happens with language, but it also happens with just general cultural norms. And I've noticed this just I'm half Mexican, and I spent my formative years growing up in Mexico, and I kind of have both cultures, both languages. And I noticed there are certain ideas or expressions that can come across easier in Spanish because of the specific words that you have to define that mood or that emotion. And then in English, you have other ones. And I've noticed there's almost like the personality and the humor that I have when I'm in Spanish mode and I'm in Mexico, versus the humor and the personality that kind of comes in from my English mode when I'm in the US. And that to me clarifies, or I guess, it makes it clear that is what happens. We kind of adopt cultural norms, whether we want to or not, because that's just, we're like sponges, and we grow up in an environment where we just take everything in. We make meaning of things. We take in words. We assign meanings to the experiences that we're having, and we define it all within the context of what the words that we have in our mind. And every culture is slightly different. So yeah, I do think that in general, all of us will be defined to a great extent by the culture where we grew up. Not only the culture of that society, but our particular family culture, influenced by worldviews. You know, if your family has a specific worldview or a religion it adheres to, we end up kind of being shaped and defined by that. So yeah, I think that it's a universal thing. We're all kind of just molded, so to speak, into the person that we adopt through these societal norms and views, or at least how we think we should be, that kind of fits the mold of where we grew up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you have a sense that, I mean, my thought was always that the teachers, like the Jesus, Krishna, Buddha type characters that keep coming to us, thankfully, and sharing some knowledge, that the whole point was to like move us beyond that a little bit so we could like raise our kids without giving them that whole trip about you're supposed to be someone different than who you are. Is that, do you have a sense that that's the goal that you're helping contribute to? Or do you think this is just how it's going to be and there's always going to be this process of like growing into adulthood, realizing that like, hey, I could just, that developmental process of every person of coming to self-acceptance we're just going to start. Do you see what I'm saying? That we're going to start out, we're going to be given, and then we're going to have this whole trip of like, oh, I'm not supposed to be who I am. And then we're going to learn that, oh, it's fine. Or do you think we can move past that dip?
I'm not sure. I've thought about this a lot. I do find it interesting that a lot of these historical figures that arise, like the Jesus, Buddha type characters, seem to have their, or the origin of their transformation seems to occur around a similar age, right? Which is the similar age of midlife crisis. I think there is something to say about reaching a point in life where you kind of pause and say, wait, am I doing this correctly? Like, could there be another way? And maybe there's some form of awareness or enlightenment or whatever we want to call it that takes place where you just start to see things differently through a new lens or a new perspective. I think all of us can access that at some point. I feel like life in general is like a game of Tetris. If you'll recall the object of the game of Tetris, you have shapes that show up and you're trying to make the best of those shapes. You can twist them around and move them left and right, and you're trying to make them fit on each other. But the point of the game is you just play it until it's game over. There's no real point to it, right? And there's limited control, which gives us the illusion of being in control of the game, but really you don't know what shape is going to show up next. I feel like that's what life is like. But we go through life thinking we're playing a game of chess where it's calculated. And if I do this, life will respond with that. And sometimes it's going well. So it feels like, okay, this really is how it is. And I can master this. I can somehow win the game. And winning the game may be different for us based on societal norms and views, but it could be, playing the game of success and trying to be wealthy or famous or powerful or something like that. Then at some point, if you live long enough, the chess game doesn't play according to the rules because it was never a chess game. It's been Tetris all along. And this random shape shows up in the form of loss, the loss of a loved one or sickness that you weren't expecting or something that just doesn't compute the way you were thinking it would. And that's the moment of the proverbial rug gets swept out from under your feet. And you're kind of left with, well, wait a second. I didn't think that this was going to happen this way. So now how do I make sense of it all? I think those are those key moments that certain characters in history experience. And they make that transformation from thinking they're caught up in a game of chess and switching to realizing the nature of reality is uncertainty. We don't know what's coming our way. How do we best deal with that? And you see echoes of this in the teachings of a lot of these historical characters. Like, Jesus has the whole analogy of be like the lilies in the field that don't have to stress or worry about what's coming. The Buddha has the whole concept of groundlessness and becoming comfortable with discomfort, not needing that certainty. And I think as we start to let go of the need to have something firm to stand on, in one sense, in a religious sense, it could be that you put faith in God. In the Buddhist sense, it could be that you become comfortable with discomfort and with uncertainty. And then we start to find that new grounding for, I guess, the remainder of our lives after that point, where we can more skillfully tackle the game and the pieces that show up because we're no longer bent out of shape because we got the shape that we didn't want. Instead of thinking, oh, the world has done me an injustice, I didn't deserve this piece, we start to recognize any piece can show up for anyone. And there was no, it's not about getting what's fair or getting what I deserve or avoiding what I don't deserve. I could be a kind, compassionate person and still get this horrible Tetris piece that now I've got to figure out how to make it work. And there's nothing personal about it. That's just the nature of reality. I feel like that's an important transition that a lot of people go through if they live long enough. That realization that that's how life is. It's like a game of Tetris, and it's not so much like the game of chess that we thought we were playing. Does that make sense?
It's a beautiful metaphor because the chess is totally deterministic, right? There's no luck. It's all strategy. You know all the moves that are possible in advance. And Tetris is really, it's just so clear.
Yeah.
You're just reacting to things outside of your control and doing your best.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. I know. I take it. I take the metaphor. It's deep. And it's so easy for me, at least. It's like, I think of myself as so capable in the doing realm. Mm-hmm. It's just so easy for that to like just flow into the chess mentality of like, oh, just because I know how to do things, I can do anything and I'm in control of what happens here, which is just so patently false.
Right.
Yeah. So did you, okay. So for people who are traditionally religious, I think they have a bit of an advantage in this zone. You grow up with this whole like God or faith concept. There's this kind of built-in humility there. Did you grow up with religion?
I did. Yes. I grew up in a religious household and had a very religious life, I'd say, all the way through my adulthood. I spent my formative years in middle school and high school. I would attend seminary and institute classes, like an hour each day, studying religion as part of my almost like in conjunction with school. And then my school was a religious school. I went to a Catholic high school and middle school without being Catholic. So my mom's side of the family is Catholic, and then my dad converted to Mormonism. So I grew up kind of in both of those cultures as a devout Mormon, but with heavy Catholic background and upbringing too, because of my schooling and family. And then I spent 2 years as a missionary out proselyting in South America. So yeah, I definitely had a very strong religious upbringing, but I went through in my early adult years in my 30s, I think my early 30s, through a deconstruction of my beliefs and what some people would define as a crisis of faith. And so the way that I understood reality to be is not working. That's not how it's actually presenting itself. And as I wrestled with reconciling that, I encountered this notion in Buddhism, of uncertainty and groundlessness. It's a concept called groundlessness. But essentially what happened to me was I was always fixated on answers. Life, I think we go through life and we kind of have these deep existential, if we want to call them, questions that just linger. Like, why are we here? Who am I? What is the meaning of all of this? Or what happens when we die? And I had the answers to all of these existential questions through my belief system. But like I said, when they don't match, when they suddenly, for whatever reason, don't make sense to you anymore, you try to grasp at some other answer that might give me a sense of this makes sense again. So that's what I did. I kind of went into seeking mode, seeking specifically other answers that might work better for me. And as I was going through that process, I encountered Buddhism, and Buddhism doesn't really have answers to any of those existential questions. Well, let's look at the question itself. Where does this question come from? Why do I feel the need to know? And that shift, it was a radical shift in my way of thinking. I was always so focused on the answers. And here I was being told, well, forget the answer for a moment. Let's focus on the question, because the question actually matters more than the answer, And when we sit with the question long enough, understanding of the question and where the question comes from and why I feel the need to know, when I can become comfortable with the uncertainty of questions like that are unanswerable questions, then my comfort anchored from having an answer to feeling okay with understanding the question and not needing an answer.
technical issues, bad audio. Now a little transition.
I love talking about this kind of stuff. It's something that brings me a lot of joy, and I feel like it ends up usually being really beneficial for others to hear some of these concepts and ideas that they had never thought about. That's how it was for me. It was encountering a way of thinking that had never occurred to me before. And it gave me a sense of peace because, like I said, I was so focused for so long on having answers, and that when the answer is, when I have the answer to a point where it's satisfactory to me, that's when I will have peace. So what I strive to have is the answer. And this was a big shift to say, well, let's just sit with the questions long enough to where that same sense of peace may come from understanding the question and not feeling the need to have an answer. And then that is a deeper sense of peace because, like I said before, it can't be shaken. It's a sense of peace that comes from being content with not knowing, being content with not having answers. And rather than thinking, I'll be okay once I finally get the answer to this. There's a Zen story. Zen is a form of Buddhism that's pretty known for having like riddles and stories and what they call koans. And these are meant to be stories or riddles that baffle you. And again, with the idea that if you approach this with the thought of, if I can make sense of things, that's when I'll be okay. Zen is saying, when you become comfortable with understanding that you can't make sense of things, that's when you'll be okay. So they introduce these koans that are meant to be baffling riddles, right? And some of them are pretty famous. Like there's the notion of the sound of one hand clapping. And it's like, the question is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And you can wrestle with that conceptually. You can try to answer it. But for me, as with all koans, it's not about the answer. It's just about sitting with the question. And ultimately, like, well, why do I even need to know the sound of one hand clapping? It's whatever it is. That's what it is. But I don't have to define it and say, it's this, and then give you the answer. So with this approach, with the notion of koans, the notion of questions versus answers, I feel like life, in a way, is the koan. It's the riddle, and trying to make sense of life. That's the riddle that we're always trying to answer, and it's something that you can't really answer. You don't make sense of it, but you experience it because here we are, we're living. But what if I didn't have to have the answer? What if I was okay with sitting with the riddle itself? And life is the riddle. It's like, it's not something to be solved. It's something to be experienced. And I'm experiencing it as I go along. And I think we forget that sometimes because here we are experiencing life, but that's not enough. We're trying to make sense of it and say, but why am I experiencing life? Or what happens, what happened before, or what happens after? Or we're trying to do more than just experience what is. So I think that's an idea and a notion that sometimes people will hear and say, I've never thought of it that way. And then they start to sit with a little bit more comfort in the experience of being alive rather than in trying to make sense of what it is to be alive,
Yeah, I love that. I love that distinction, just to be in it and concerned about what's happening in this moment.
Yeah.
Which is our, and I had this other, it's not a radical realization, but I had this thought the other day that when we think about consciousness, and it's a big question, what is consciousness? The hard problem of consciousness. A lot of times I end up thinking about thinking and like, what is the difference between beings that think and beings that don't think? But actually to have a conscious experience is not about thinking, it's about the feeling, right? It's like actually having an experience as opposed to just an experience that comes out of the stimuli that affect us. And so to me, that like maps to what you're saying is it's not really like, it doesn't really matter what we think about it. The key part of it is that we are having this conscious experience and we can have some sort of influence over shepherding what that conscious experience is.
Right. Yeah. And I think, like you said, consciousness itself is such a difficult word to, like, what does it mean? Right. Not a lot of people sit and think about a notion like concept or a concept like consciousness. Another one that I think is much more universal and still equally problematic is something like love. Almost everyone will experience it at some point. The idea of falling in love or feeling love towards your parents or your kids or your pets. How do you define it though? I think a lot of people, if they really had to sit and define it, would really struggle because it's like, well, I don't know exactly how I define it. But most people would say, but I know what it feels like. I've experienced it. And I think this is similar to that. It's like, maybe the problem is trying to define it. Maybe the right way to approach it is I don't have to define it. I just have to experience it. Or I don't have to, but I get to experience it. And I think fortunately for me, love is one of those that I could certainly say I have experienced it. I do experience it, but it would get a little problematic if I had to write it down and actually define it. Consciousness is similar. It's like, I don't know exactly how I define it, but I can tell you I had multiple instances where I really feel like I'm feeling what it is to be alive. I don't know what that's called, but I'm feeling it. And I think anyone could, if we approach it that way, then I feel like it's a lot more bonding, to like, man, you know what it is to be alive. You know what it is to feel, to have strong feelings of loss or pain or sadness, intense feelings of joy, happiness, contentment. But as soon as we start to delineate and say, well, let's put the line here. Where did this become this? Then we start comparing and I don't know if he's experienced love because that's not how I experienced love. But if we don't define it, we allow it to be, we both know what it is to feel and to be alive. And I think that's a more healthy approach to it, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess inclusive is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
There's also this room for the mystery of it.
Right.
Like I could feel it in different ways. Yeah. Consciousness, love. The other thing that comes to mind when you're saying that is, purpose. This podcast is a lot about purpose. So rather than trying to define it, I'll just ask you, have you felt times in your life where you're what I would call living in your purpose and felt times where you were not? You recognize those feelings?
Yes, I would definitely say there have been times in my life where I felt like I was living in my sense of purpose. To be honest, I felt this when I was a missionary for my church, that like, this is the point. This is the whole reason that I'm here, is to spread this message. And then later I felt like, oh no, that wasn't the purpose. And then I've since shifted back to, the purpose is all of it. Like it's what it is. And now I feel it again, not because I'm doing something specific or sharing a certain message. I feel like I'm fulfilling the purpose of just, if the purpose for me, this is what I think for me, what it feels like is the purpose was to just be here and to experience this, that like there is no purpose. The purpose is for me is to realize there is no purpose. And now what am I going to do with life? And I feel like that's where I am. Like I'm trying to live the life of purposeless purpose, to give you a Buddhist answer to that. Purposeless purpose for me would feel like,
it's like a post-purpose purpose.
Yes. And it feels like that. I feel like that is where I am. And that would be whether I'm doing this or whether I'm doing something else or whether I'm not doing anything, I would still feel like I'm in that space of purposeless purpose, and enjoying it, observing mostly, to be honest, just observing the experience of being alive and being content with that. It's almost like I feel like I somehow lucked out into this movie theater where I sat down and I'm watching the show of life. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is the best movie that's ever been made. And now I just get to watch it. I don't have to do anything. Like watching it would be enough. But the fact that I get to interact with the movie as it's unfolding, well, that's just icing on the cake now. But watching it feels like that's enough. That's the show. That's how purpose makes sense for me.
Okay. I mean, I think I need your help here because I'm really wanting to project that. I mean, just the fact that you took this call, which you had like there's like no incentive to do really, but like you have you have a message. Like I feel like you must have a kind of vocation, like a kind of call to share the process that you've gone through. So it doesn't seem like to me it would be just all things being equal if you were working at a gas station or carving wooden spoons or doing this podcast about secular Buddhism. There's one of those things you're called to do. Is that not right?
Yeah, I think for me, what it kind of became, I noticed there were two main things that I thoroughly enjoy doing. One of them is talking about these topics of mindfulness, Buddhism. And the other one is talking about paragliding and flying. Like those are my two passions. And several years ago, I was at work realizing what if I could kind of position myself to where these are the two things that I get to talk about all the time. And I don't have to do marketing and website development and the things that I was doing for work. And that set me on this course to do a podcast and to start a flight school. And now those are the two things that I do. Had you contacted me and said, hey, we want to talk to you about paragliding, and I would have been on this call just as eager and excited to talk about paragliding and how you do ridge soaring and finding thermals to stay up in the air. Because it's something I really enjoy. And this is the other one. The benefit of this one that I would say is an added benefit is I think this talking about these concepts can produce profound changes for people in their life if they are looking for these types of concepts. So does paragliding. You know, I'll talk about paragliding, and someone who's dreamt of flying their whole life will hear it and get all inspired and then learn to fly. And they're like, you changed my life for the better because now you taught me to fly. I get that on both sides. And on this side, I think it's a little bit more satisfying to have that sense of giving somebody a new set of tools to deal a little bit more skillfully with the complexity of being alive and all that entails. So yeah, there is a part of it that does feel like there could be kind of a mission to it, but it doesn't feel like preaching to me because I don't think this is for everyone. I think there are people who would probably start listening to our talk today and say, these two wackadoodles, what are they talking about? They're totally wrong. You know, the answer's over here in my rigid worldview. And that would be fine. I would be like, yeah, stay over there. This probably isn't for you. And that's the way I approach paragliding too. If you're terrified of heights, don't come try to learn to fly. Why would you do that to yourself? But it is for someone. And that's how I treat this conversation here. These concepts and ideas of groundlessness and purposeless purpose. Like it's not for everyone, but it is for someone. And just like I happened to come across these notions and ideas and it changed my life, I didn't know that these were concepts that would be beneficial for me, but they were. I like to talk about them because maybe someone listening will say, wow, these concepts are actually, they resonate with the way I try to make sense of life and reality, and it'll be beneficial to them. And that's why I like to talk about them on any platform at any time, because someone might hear it and say, I'm so glad I heard that today.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think that is a great job of answering the question, and also like justifying this little bit of projection that there is vocation to it. And I think that distinction is really great, that just because you're passionate, or one is passionate and one feels a sense of mission and vocation, doesn't mean that it has to be for everybody. You know, like there's no expectation that people are going to be into it, but there is like a deep desire to contribute in a specific way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I really like that you felt this experience. We talked about the experience of consciousness, the experience of love, the experience of purpose. You felt that doing this missionary thing. that you would just not do now. But yeah, you can kind of recognize and honor that you felt that the you that was then felt that then.
Yes, definitely.
You don't have to judge. You don't have to judge it or criticize it
Right.
from your perspective now.
Yeah. And, you know, I've had people from my former worldview from that world that I was in ask me like, well, you know, what do you think about when you were a missionary? Do you feel like you were out there deceiving people or teaching them false things? And I say, well, no. And they're like, but you don't believe any of that stuff anymore. It's like, no, I don't. Well, then why would you be okay with thinking that you were out there teaching all these messages at some point? I said, because the me of then believed that I was doing the right thing and teaching what needed to be taught. The me of now doesn't view it that way, but I don't view those as the same people. That's like the me of now totally honors the me of then. Even though we're worlds apart now in how we understand the world. And I cherish that memory and those experiences and those feelings, even though there's no way I would go out there and do that now or even share those same messages because those messages don't resonate to me. They don't make sense to me. But yeah, I'm at peace with who I was then.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of this guy, one of my mentors and friends, this guy Daniel that I lived with in Argentina many years ago, who used to be he was a Catholic priest, and he left the priesthood because whatever, it's a long story, but he fell in love, left the priesthood, but he was really into organic farming, and I was studying organic farming at this place. He was there, and he's like, yeah, he was like, you know, I used to think God is going to save you, and I was so passionate about it, and now I think organic vegetables are going to save you, and I'm so passionate about it, and I have no idea how long it's going to last. It's like tomorrow I'll think something else and I'll do that, and he'll do it with his whole being and his whole heart, and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah,
transparent.
That reminds me. I have a friend named Pamela who taught me this beautiful expression that when you encounter someone who has a very strong belief about something. For example, like if I were to talk to the me of 15 years ago when I was a missionary, that me would be pretty stern with the message of you need to follow this path because no other path is the correct path. Rather than me saying, no, you're wrong, like all paths are good. This expression Pamela taught me is to counter things like that with, I feel strongly about things too, you know? Maybe not the same things, but that's what it reminded me with the story you were just saying. It was, you know, whether it's God needs to save you or organic farming is going to save you. I think we can all kind of identify, I sometimes feel strongly about things too. Maybe not the same things as you, but I know that feeling. I tend to think everyone's life would be a little bit better if you got into paragliding and just flew around. But at the same time, I know that that's not true. That would make some people's lives a lot more stressful and scary. But it does so much for me that I think, well, you know, well, I certainly enjoy it, but I know it's not for everyone. So I frame it in that same framing of, if you tell me what the big thing is that you're passionate about, I could say, well, there are things that I am passionate about too. We can identify our similarity there, even though it's not the same thing that we're passionate about.
Yeah. And the underlying desire is really one of giving and contribution. You're like, I found this awesome thing. I really wanted it. I want you to do it because I know it's going to make you happier. You know, whether or not that's true. That's where it's coming from, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see, a couple times today, you mentioned loss, and you mentioned it in a way that made me think you experienced something like that and it had changed you. Is that true?
Oh, yes, definitely. That wasn't the catalyst for my big change. Loss occurred later. I lost my dad to cancer. That was a loss that by the time I went through that, I felt much more equipped with understanding my feelings and emotions, because at that point, Buddhism was already well established as a practice for me in my life. But going through that transition of loss, one thing I found interesting I think prior to that experience, loss produces a very, very strong emotions. And I think we're resistant to feeling emotions. We don't, especially the unpleasant ones, right? Like sadness and pain. We don't want to feel those. And we dread the thought that we might experience this, soon. So with my dad with cancer, it's a slow process there at the end. Like, it's coming. It's not an overnight surprise. And when you experience loss in a very surprising manner, it just suddenly hits you. But with my dad, it was like we saw it coming and it's getting closer and closer. And I could see other family members like just dreading the moment of loss and the intensity of those feelings that were going to arise because they're already starting to formulate. Where with me, I felt very grateful that I had no desire to push those feelings away. There was no aversion to pain, no aversion to crying. So it allowed me to have this beautiful transition at the end with my dad to like sit with him and tell him how much I love him and thank him for the memories and sit and cry with him and feel all the feelings without feeling ashamed and without feeling aversion. Like, oh no, I don't want people to see that I'm welling up or that I'm crying. It was like, no, this is the beauty of this moment. I'm just feeling it all. And had I not encountered these notions and ideas that Buddhism gave me, I think I would have missed that opportunity because I would have tried so hard to not feel that until I have to, right? To the actual moment of loss. But I didn't feel that. I felt like, oh, I'm not afraid to cry. I mean, even now I can talk about it and well up and I feel zero sorrow around that. Sometimes we start to feel. And when we're really feeling, we say, oh, sorry, as if I should apologize that you saw that I was getting sentimental. And I don't feel that. I feel like, hey, if I'm going to sit here and talk about my dad, yeah, I'm probably going to well up and feel tears, but I'm not going to apologize about it because that's what happens when you think about someone that you've lost that you love, right? I thought that was a really interesting thing to go through with my dad's loss. The earlier loss for me that was the catalyst that became the start of the faith crisis and I guess just the rug swept out from under your feet moment. That was different. That was, I was going through a really rocky stage in my marriage and the rug had been swept out from under my feet. It was all on the brink of collapse. And in that period of time, I really decided I needed to dig deep into my faith, my beliefs. Because at the time I thought that is probably the culprit for why the marriage is rocky is I'm not good enough of a believer. If I don't know how to word that, but I'm not a good enough person. So, which is weird because I lived everything textbook, but, I'm trying to reconcile, right? Cause back then you're thinking I'm playing the game of chess. And the way the rules work is that if I'm following these rules and I'm avoiding doing these things on this other list, life should be working out for me, but I'm still finding myself in this rocky place. So I went digging deeper and the more I went digging, the more I would uncover things that I didn't know. I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this now. Church history, any religion, you go digging into its origins and you're always going to, it's always problematic when you look under those covers. That's what was happening with me. So that was the catalyst that led towards finding another way and discovering Buddhism. But like I said, it was years into that where I first encountered like close loss, which was the loss of my dad. Prior to that, I had lost my grandma. I lost a good friend when I was little in elementary school. That was a meaningful experience that I went through that kind of left me always thinking about death. Like, I feel like death is one of those things you kind of try to put it away and not think about it. But because I had a friend in school, like I remember it became a topic that was almost always on my mind. The thought that, oh geez, I could lose any of my friends at any moment, which helped me become a much better friend because it was always on my mind that I don't know how long I'll have these friends. So I've always been like a good friend because that's in the back of my mind. And I would hate to wake up tomorrow and be like, oh no, that was the last interaction we had. So yeah, those are some of those pivotal moments for me in my own journey.
Yeah. Wow. And thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I just love that what you said about the thing that people do about saying sorry when they have emotions, as if it's like, oh, we're supposed to maintain this fiction that we're robots.
Yeah.
Actually, I accidentally revealed a little bit of my humanity to you. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Which those are the moments where I feel connected to people. When it's
Exactly.
like, oh, you're a human.
Yes. You know, what's crazy when I was going through that with my dad and then he passed away, I remember very clearly thinking, oh my gosh, everybody at some point has lost someone, is losing someone, or will lose someone. And it's going to feel like this. And I remember thinking, how could we ever not get along with each other? I mean, all I have to do is think, like, if you were to tell me are your parents still around? You still have your parents? So when I talk to someone and I think one day you're going to feel what I felt, that instantly bonds me to where I feel like compassion and kindness for you because you're going to feel that. And when I talk to someone who has lost their parents, I feel the same thing. I'm like, oh, you know what this is. Now I know what it is. And that moment bonded me to them. And in a way, it bonds me to you because there's no way around it. We're all going to eventually lose the people that we love. And once you've felt that, I feel like, how could we ever disagree or argue or fight over something? It'd be like deep in the back of my mind, I'd be like, I don't care what it is that where we're at odds over views, political, religious, whatever, because deeper than that is this human experience of loss that we're all going to go through, or some have gone through, are going through, or will go through. And that immediately makes me feel like, now there we connect, because when that day comes and you need to talk to someone who's been through it, that's where people like me are like, well, I've been through it. Let's talk to it. Or you need a hug or, all the human things. That to me is really powerful. And what else is there? At the end of the day, those are the things that really matter.
Yeah. Wow. It makes me think of, the Buddha story of discovering suffering and death and old age and disease. And this take on it that had never occurred to me before this conversation, that those are the things, the inevitabilities that we just share, all of us.
Yeah.
And those are actually the things that inextricably link us, that we all have just death and grief waiting on our doorstep. And that's something that instead of ignoring or denying, that we can actually just connect about at any moment, like meeting some random person on the bus and you could hey, we both know what we're all info. We're all like subject to disease, and we're going to die of old age, and we're going to be brought to our knees by grief of our friends and our pets and our parents and our kids. And yeah. My family's from India, and there's a strong, I think in most cultures really, but definitely in Indian culture, there's a strong thing of like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? This whole thing. And I did all of that like relatively late, or maybe 15 years, where my mom was asking that question or just stopped asking because she was like, well, it's never going to happen. And I remember when I had a kid, I had this sense of incredible understanding and connection with my parents and then everybody else who's ever had a kid. And it was like, oh, maybe this is actually the deeper spiritual truth of why all these societies want everyone to have all these kids, because they can really, now you can relate. now you just have this passport to acceptance of all these other people, just like being a kid. Not everyone has kids, but everyone is born, right? So whether you've known them or not, everyone has parents, and
yeah,
you can relate to that sense of loss.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned that inspired me as I was listening to your podcast this morning was about anger. So we've got into like sadness a little bit. And I've been in this conversation with some of my friends about self-violence because I had a retreat experience a couple of weeks ago. And one of my friends wrote back to me and was like, yeah, I'm really trying to figure out what is useful about anger, or how can I, rather than just denying this emotion, being like, oh, this is bad, I shouldn't feel it. Like, what can I learn? Or what is that word in medicine? Like what are the indications for anger? When is it appropriate? Yeah. Do you have anything to share about that?
I'm reading a book right now called How We Live is How We Die by Pema Chodron. And there's a concept in Tibetan Buddhism, well, in Buddhism in general, but for sure in Tibetan Buddhism, called co-emergent wisdom. And the idea is that the thing that we see as a fault, let's say in this case, anger is the example. And I say, oh, I have the propensity to feel anger or to be angry. Co-emerging with that anger is the wisdom of anger, right? The wisdom that arises from, if I understand my anger, through that understanding, sitting with it and befriending the emotion of anger, then I obtain the wisdom. And this is how it is for all of the things that we view as, I don't know, weaknesses might be the word. We all have them, right? Where we think, oh, I'm really disorganized, or I'm really lazy, or co-emerging with that thing that we would label as the thing I don't want is the thing that you actually do want. But you can't have one without the other. We go through our day-to-day lives feeling aversion for that thing, in this case, anger. And I might say, well, now I'm angry and I'm angry that I'm angry. So I'm going to really try to not be an angry person. What happens in that process, the aversion to the anger, makes you miss the wisdom that co-emerges with the anger. So the Buddhist approach would say, okay, I can identify anger as something that I experience or I have the propensity for. So when it does arise, I'm going to sit with it. Where is this coming from? Why am I feeling this anger? What does anger actually feel like? Where am I feeling it in my body? And you kind of sit with it. And what happens is you don't get rid of it, but you change the relationship you have with anger. And then when this big, ugly thing, visualize your anger as a character that's sitting there in front of you. It's ugly. You don't like it. It smells. You don't want it there. You've been poking at it with these spears, which only makes it more mad. What if we drop the fight and say, I am so sorry I've been pushing you away so long. Sit with me. Tell me, welcome back. Why are you here? Why have I seen you as my enemy? Let's actually talk. You befriend it. And the wisdom of anger is what co-arises with it. And with that understanding and the new relationship you have with anger, with your anger, a new form of wisdom co-arises with it. And I really like that thought and that view of all of the things that we would look at as emotions. We tend to put them in our baskets, right? This basket has the pleasant. I want more of it. This basket has the unpleasant. I want less of it. And once we do that and we weigh it, we play the game of do everything you can to get more of the emotions you like and do everything you can to get less of the emotions you don't like. Equanimity is balancing those out, saying, they're all welcome at the table. All of you come here and sit here. Who's here now? Oh, it's anger. Hi, anger. Let's talk. What brings you here today? A beautiful thing happens in that process. The relationship with anger changes. A new form of wisdom arises with that anger because you actually listened to it and learned from it. And then the intensity of it when it's there is less because it's not this enemy that's pounding at the gates. It's actually an old friend. It's like, it's still unpleasant, but here, come on in, old friend, And I think there's a lot of wisdom that can be gained when we change that relationship we have with our emotions, especially emotions, strong ones like anger.
Yeah. I mean, it's my sense these days that, because I think I was really in that camp for a long time. Like, oh, I'm this guy who's trying to be enlightened. I'm not going to try and have emotions. Doesn't really work that well. And so I've moved to a philosophy of, all right, what is the information here? Like what happened? Like what was the belief I had? What was the action? What was the line that was crossed? Like there's some information coming with this anger. And if I can receive that and learn from it, then I'm like I'm drinking the juice of the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Noah. This has been great. I would love to talk to you for hours more. And I just hope, I just hope we could hang out at some point. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'd be happy to do this again. If you want to find another time, we could do this again and chat more.
Hi everyone, this is Martin, your producer. I just want to take a minute to thank our guest Noah Rasheta for joining us today, and also to thank you all for listening. 10,000 Heroes is brought to you by momentumlab, our year-long coaching program. Let me introduce you to the team. Pierre does our artwork, DJ Plainview composed our theme music, and I handled all the editing and sound design. Also, if you like the show, please follow it, rate it, tell all your friends, and reach out to us somehow. We love communication. All of this really help us make the impact we want to make. And now we're closing down this episode with a word from our main sponsor, who also happens to be our host, Anchor.
And now a message from our sponsor, me again. 10,000 Heroes is brought to you by momentumlab. I normally refer to momentumlab as a coaching program or a goal accelerator, but it's really more like a master's degree in life. When you join momentumlab, we help you get crystal clear on what it is you actually want, who you want to be, what you want to do, and how you want to contribute. And then we get into all the painful details of what has been blocking you this whole time. And then we give you the knowledge, the tools, and the support you need to get there. Sometimes that's a spreadsheet, sometimes it's a mindset hack, sometimes it's a lecture, and sometimes it's a hug. Our only attachment is to your higher self. So, when you're ready to be the next version of yourself, in your business, for your family, or just for your own sense of fulfillment, drop me a line.